It stood there, at the end of the hallway, a rusty monolith in a sea of faded blue lockers. Number 13. Nobody dared to touch it, not anymore. The school itself was old, its hallways filled with the ghosts of laughter long faded. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through grimy windows. The air always felt heavy, burdened with secrets. Two friends, Jake and Emily, dared to walk those halls. Jake, always the skeptic, scoffed at the stories. Emily, however, felt a shiver crawl down her spine every time she passed locker number 13. It all started with a whisper. A legend passed down through generations of students. Locker 13, cursed. They said it was the locker of a student who vanished without a trace. One day, as they walked past the locker, a cold wind slammed the locker door shut. The sound echoed through the empty hallway. Emily jumped, her heart pounding. Jake just laughed. "See, it's just an old locker," he said, his voice braver than he felt. But Emily noticed he wouldn't look directly at it. The air grew colder. Emily felt a presence, something watching them from the shadows. She wanted to run, but Jake, trying to mask his fear, stepped closer to the locker. He ran his hand over the cold metal. "What's the worst that could happen?" he challenged, his voice echoing in the silent hallway. Emily knew he was trying to convince himself as much as her. The dare was almost instantaneous. A group of older kids, sensing their fear, surrounded them. "I dare you to open it," sneered Mark, the school bully. Jake, never one to back down from a dare, puffed up his chest. He knew he couldn't refuse, not in front of them. Emily grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook her off, his eyes fixed on the rusty latch. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He hesitated, a shiver running down his spine. But it was too late to back down now. Taking a deep breath, Jake gripped the latch. He pulled. Nothing. The locker wouldn't budge. The other kids laughed, their laughter echoing ominously in the hallway. The next day, Jake brought tools. He was determined to open the locker. Emily begged him to leave it alone. "It's not worth it," she pleaded. But Jake wouldn't listen. He was obsessed. He worked on the lock, his frustration growing with every passing minute. The metal felt strangely cold beneath his touch, colder than it should be. But still, the locker wouldn't open. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the schoolyard, Jake gave up. Defeated, he threw his tools into his bag. He had to admit a sliver of fear was starting to creep into his heart. "We'll be back tomorrow," he muttered, more to himself than to Emily. She just nodded, her eyes never leaving the locker. It seemed to pulsate in the fading light. Section 5, Day 2, Scratching Sounds. The air was thick with an eerie silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. That night, Emily had a nightmare. It was unlike any she had ever experienced before, vivid and terrifying. She dreamt of being trapped inside the locker, the same one that had haunted her thoughts all day. Scratching sounds filled her ears, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. She woke up in a cold sweat, the sounds still echoing in her mind. She could almost feel the vibrations of the scratching in her bones. The next day they returned to the locker. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As they approached, they heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the locker. It was as if something was desperately trying to get out. Emily froze, her blood turning to ice. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat louder than the last. Jake, however, seemed more determined than ever. His face was set in a mask of resolve. He grabbed his tools, his hands shaking slightly. He knew this was their only chance to uncover the truth. He told himself it was just rats. Just ordinary, everyday rats, but deep down he knew it was something more. Something far more sinister. The scratching grew louder as Jake worked on the lock. It was frantic, desperate. Each click of the lockpick seemed to agitate whatever was inside. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She ran. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway, a stark contrast to the eerie scratching. She didn't stop running until she was out of the school and into the sunlight. The warmth of the sun was a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped her heart. Section 6, Day 3, A Ghastly Face. The school had always been a place of learning and laughter. but now it was shrouded in an unsettling silence. Emily refused to go back to the locker. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But Jake, his obsession growing, continued his quest. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. He skipped class, ignoring his friends' pleas to stop. They thought he was losing his mind, but Jake couldn't let it go. He had to know what was inside. Days turned into nights. The scratching continued, relentless. It was as if the locker itself was alive, taunting him. Then, one evening, as Jake struggled with the lock, a pale face appeared in the narrow gap of the locker door. His heart raced as he realized he wasn't alone. It was a girl's face. Her expression was one of pure terror, as if she had been trapped for an eternity. Her eyes were wide with terror. They seemed to plead for help, begging Jake to do something. Her skin was deathly pale, almost translucent, as if she had never seen the light of day. She reached out a hand, her fingers long and bony. They trembled as they extended towards Jake, desperate for contact. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a raspy breath. It sent chills down Jake's spine, freezing him in place. Jake stumbled back in horror, dropping his tools. The face vanished. He was alone. Had he imagined it? He wasn't sure anymore. The line between reality and nightmare was blurring. But he knew one thing. He couldn't ignore this any longer. The mystery of the locker had to be solved, and he was the only one who could do it. The fear was real, but so was his determination. Section 7. The Janitor's Tale. Jake sought out the school janitor, a grizzled old man named Gus. Gus had been at the school for decades. He had seen it all. Jake told him about the locker, the scratching, the face. Gus listened patiently, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and fear. When Jake was finished, Gus sighed. "That locker," he said, his voice low. "It's been here longer than anyone can remember." He told Jake the legend of the girl who vanished. Her name was Sarah. She had been a student at the school many years ago. One day she disappeared without a trace. Some say she was trapped in the locker. Others say she's still there. Section 8. The Decision. Jake was torn. He wanted to help Sarah, but he was also terrified. He knew he couldn't just leave her trapped in there. He had to do something. He decided to tell Emily everything. He found her in the library, her face pale and drawn. She listened to his story, her eyes wide with fear. When he was finished, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to help her," she said. Jake nodded. They both knew what they had to do. They had to open the locker. Section 9. The Final Attempt. They returned to the locker one last time, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridor. The air was thick with tension. Each breath they took felt heavy with anticipation. They had been here before, but this time felt different. This time they were determined to uncover the truth. Armed with tools and a renewed sense of purpose, they set to work. The tools felt cold and heavy in their hands, but their resolve was unwavering. They had spent countless nights planning this moment, and now it was finally here. The scratching was louder than ever, a symphony of despair that seemed to resonate through the very walls of the school. Each scrape and scratch was a reminder of the mystery they were so desperate to solve. Finally, with a groan of metal, the lock broke. The sound echoed through the hallway, a signal of their small victory. They exchanged nervous glances, knowing that whatever lay beyond this door could change everything. The locker door swung open, revealing a dark and empty space. The darkness seemed to swallow their hopes, leaving them with more questions than answers. They had expected to find something, anything, but the emptiness was almost more terrifying. There was no sign of Sarah, no sign of anything. The emptiness of the locker was a stark contrast to the chaos in their minds. They had been so sure that this was the key to finding her. Jake and Emily stared into the darkness, their hearts pounding. The scratching had stopped. The silence was deafening, filling the space where their hopes had once been. They felt a chill run down their spines, as if the darkness itself was watching them. The only sound was their own ragged breathing. Then they heard it. A faint noise, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. It sent shivers down their spines, making the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. A whisper, cold and faint, right behind them. "Thank you." They spun around, their eyes wide with fear. The voice was so close, yet there was no one there. It was as if the very walls had spoken. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. The shadows seemed to mock them, dancing in the dim light. They felt a sense of dread, realizing that the mystery was far from over. But the locker door stood open, a silent reminder of the mystery that would forever haunt those halls. It was a symbol of their unanswered questions, a testament to their relentless search for the truth. And as they walked away, they knew that this was just the beginning.